shocked and amazed. Check out this review on beef organs from Heart and Soil from Lene. I started taking these inconsistently with my morning coffee. I don't think I truly realized the powerful effects until I took them after lunch. I had a surge of mental clarity and a mood boost. I was so confused. I texted my husband telling him I felt like I was on a high out of the blue. Then I remembered I had taken Heart and Soil beef organs. I've been depressed and struggling to stay motivated with work in the afternoon. These help me focus and feel awake. So happy about them. Going to stop up for emergency purposes. Definitely want these on hand in the event of food shortage. Thank you, Heart and Soil. I love it. I love it. The nutrients in these organs definitely affect mood, mental clarity. So many people are deficient in them, and adding them is better than a cup of coffee, or at least as good for Lene. So check us out, heartandsoil.co, to reclaim your birthright to optimal health. If you are hearing this in mid-August, you have not missed the window. You can still sign up for our Animal-Based 30 free 30-day animal-based challenge, though it's probably like a 20-day challenge when you're hearing this podcast. You can go to Animal-Based 30 to sign up. It's free. You get the infographics, you get the ebook, a community. Join us at Heart and Soil for Animal-Based 30 in August. We're excited to see you in there. On this week's podcast, I wanted to do a second follow-up AMA. The last 2 weeks, I've done Ask Me Anything episodes in a row because I had so many good questions. Last week, I talked about Randall cycle, a bunch of other stuff. This week, I wanted to tackle APOE4, glyphosate, sunning your balls. Does it work? All kinds of interesting stuff in there on this week's AMA podcast, guys. I hope you enjoy this one. On to the podcast, my friends. Love you all. Okay, let's jump right in to the first question. This question is from Elena, who asks, would you be able to create an easily accessible document that lists important markers for blood work? Yeah, I just did a podcast on this. We can put this at the Carnivore MD website soon, but I'm going to show you guys again what blood work I got on my blood work. If you want to see the results, go to the Bloodwork July 22 Blood Work Review podcast. She says, my doctor always tries to push back and asks me, why do you want that test? I find myself not always prepared to answer these questions as I'd like to be, but with a cheat sheet in front of me, I would surely feel more empowered. I don't understand why physicians push back against patients, against humans requesting blood work to understand their own physiology. Now, perhaps Elena is saying here she doesn't really understand why she's getting something. Maybe she won't know how to interpret it, but why would physicians push back against us wanting to know more about what is going on inside of us? So you can see here that from the Bloodwork podcast, I use Wellness FX. I'm going to get my blood work done with Merrick when I go back to the States this next week. And I'll have a separate set of blood work that's pretty similar, about a month apart with LabCorp. But Merrick is awesome. They're a sponsor, but this is just a shout out to them because I appreciate them. So I got a total cholesterol panel, including NMR and the actual ApoB, the particles, the breakdown. I had HSCRP, which you want for inflammation. I had homocysteine, which you want to know how you're methylating at a high level. I had fibrinogen, which is another marker of inflammation. I had free fatty acids, which is another marker of insulin sensitivity. I had an omega index, which breaks down into EPA, DHA, arachidonic acid, and gives you a ratio there, which I think is important. It gives you an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Probably good to know some sense of how much linoleic acid is in your body, though blood and red blood cells are not as accurate for linoleic acid as an actual fat biopsy would be. That's the only way to really know how much linoleic acid is in your body. We don't do that unless you're in a research setting. Fasting insulin, the single most important test. Hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose. HOMA-IR is often ordered. It's just a calculation. TSH, full thyroid panel. T3, free T3, thyroid uptake, thyroxine binding, uptake, thyroxine, which is T4, free thyroxine index, and reverse T3. I had a cortisol in the morning. I had an IGF-1, and then you will get a Z-score for the IGF-1. All of those give you a sense of insulin sensitivity. I like IGF-1 because it helps me argue against those people who want to say that I'm making my life short. And I get to argue back and say, my IGF-1 is probably lower than yours. It was 112 in case you're wondering, and the Z-score was negative 0.5, which means it's a half a standard deviation lower than the mean of the general population. Even eating pounds of meat, organs, and tons of fruit and honey every day. Hormones, including testosterone, free and total, DHES, sex hormone binding globulin, LH and FSH, progesterone, estradiol. Women may want to get a little bit more than that, but that's a good hormonal panel to start. Liver health, ALT, AST, alkaline phosphatase, bilirubin, albumin, total protein, globulins, albumin-globulin ratio. Kidneys, I don't think many doctors are going to argue with that. Creatinine, EGFR, BUN, albumin, et cetera. Electrolytes are part of a comprehensive metabolic panel. Doctors aren't going to argue with that. 25 hydroxy vitamin D and CBC with differential. I want a full iron panel with serum iron, ferritin, total iron binding capacity, and iron saturation. Serum folate, B12, RBC magnesium, and that's pretty much it. The one thing that was left off of that panel from Wellness FX that I wish I'd gotten that I will get on the panel with Merrick was a uric acid, and that was about it. So I think that's a pretty good panel. Basically, you want to know your insulin sensitivity. If you get nothing else, get a fasting insulin, and that will change the face of medicine. Should be less than 5 micro IU per ml. So hopefully that helps. Elena, in the future at Carnivore MD, there will be a new updated website coming in the next few weeks. We're going to have a calculator there for you guys. So you can put in your weight, you can put in your activity level, and it'll give you macros, protein, fat, and carbohydrates to break down an animal-based diet to help people with this process. And if you want to get started on animal-based diet, join us for Animal-Based 30. It's starting now with Heart and Soil. You can go to Animal-Based 30 to sign up. It's free, and there's tons of resources in ebook. Change your diet, change your life. Join us for Animal-Based 30. I promise you, you will feel way better. And a lot of this blood work will look a lot better too. So next question is from Charles. He says, I've been hearing a lot about sunning your junk, sunning my balls. Is there any research supporting tanning naked or putting my testicles, my balls in the sun? Well, I think this is a fascinating question. I'm glad Charles asked this question. And there's actually some pretty interesting research from the 1930s on this question that I'm going to show you guys. So the title of the article is The Influence of Ultraviolet Radiation Upon the Excretion of Male Sex Hormones. It is from Boston State Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and I believe it is 1939. And if you go to the third or fourth page, you can see that they are looking at the androsterone concentrations, the output when they irradiate the chest and the back versus the genital region. Now, I had to look this up. I didn't learn about androsterone in medical school. It's not included in most pathways of steroid hormone synthesis, but it is a real androgen. It has about 1/7 the androgenic activity of testosterone, and it's thought to possibly be a pheromone as well. So they were looking at androsterone concentrations, and as you can see from this graphic, that 5 irradiations of the genital region elevated androsterone significantly higher and for a significantly longer time than irradiations of the chest. That's pretty interesting. Maybe there's something to butthole, taint, genital sunning. They've done other experiments here, which looked at the same thing. 6 irradiations of the genital region for androsterone concentrations versus irradiations of the chest. Now, it's important to note that irradiating the chest and back, basically getting a large amount of your skin surface area in the sun, does appear to improve levels of androgens, testosterone, sex hormones in general. But this study, I wish we would repeat this. This study suggests that actually sunning your junk, find a place where you're not going to get arrested and don't get burned, could increase at least this assayed androgen, androsterone, could increase this assayed androgen, androsterone, significantly more than the chest and the back. That's interesting to me, especially because it's a pheromone, or maybe it's a putative pheromone. So is it possible that sunning your genitals, especially for men, could make us more attractive to ladies? I don't know. Certainly something that piques all of our interest as men, because we want to be attractive to our mates or to potential mates. And this is an interesting thing. So something there. Definitely, I think the takeaway would be, as I've said on my Instagram reels, get real ultraviolet light. Don't just get a vitamin D pill. There are many benefits to vitamin D. We know this. I think that making vitamin D in your skin from ultraviolet light from the sun is better. You get more nitric oxide, you get nitric oxide in general, you get endorphins. Both of those have positive effects in humans in training your circadian rhythm. And perhaps there are all of these hormonal benefits. In fact, we know there are hormonal benefits from ultraviolet light on the skin that you don't get from a vitamin D pill necessarily. And in studies looking at the gut flora, we've seen that ultraviolet light can help modulate the gut flora in apparently a positive way by increasing alpha diversity. So lots of benefits to real ultraviolet light. The caveat question always comes up, but Paul, I live in a place where I can't get ultraviolet light for part of the year. So you should know wherever you live, what latitude, at what part of the year you will encounter a vitamin D winter, quote unquote. At what part of the year your body will no longer be able to make vitamin D in the skin, or the precursors of vitamin D in the skin from the sun, because the angle of the sun is too low. You can find that information very easily online. But I believe that anything basically above Phoenix, Arizona is going to have some degree of a vitamin D winter. When I did my residency at the University of Washington in Seattle, there was a long period of the year, probably from November to about early March or mid-March, where I was not making any vitamin D in my skin of any significant amount when it was exposed to UV light. Was that UV light still helpful for nitric oxide or endorphins? Possibly. Was it helping train my circadian rhythms? Yes, but it wasn't making vitamin D in my skin. So understand that ultraviolet light will change in intensity throughout the year. What did I do? I did some research and I chose to get into a tanning bed. This always causes people to lose their mind. They think tanning beds cause cancer. I don't think that the light from a tanning bed causes cancer any more than the light from the sun. And if you've heard my take on this, I think most skin cancer is coming from a predisposition to damage in the skin due to excess seed oils. I'm not saying that you should go out and get burned, or that someone couldn't theoretically develop skin cancer from getting burned a lot, even if they weren't eating excess seed oils. But I think that not getting burned by ultraviolet light, you can enjoy the benefits. And so when I would go to a tanning bed, my goal was to not get burned. If you go to a tanning bed, I do not believe there is any evidence to support the notion that a tanning bed will increase your risk of cancer more than being in the sunlight, which most of us accept as a very good thing, if you do not get burned. The problem for many people arises in the fact that a tanning bed is more intense than the sun. Very few people live or have ever traveled anywhere where they could be in the sun for 8 minutes or even 5 minutes and get a huge sunburn. That would be the equator for most people who were very white. Cue the photos of Elon Musk on his recent yacht. I did a whole take on that, a react video on that, which I'll share on my YouTube channel. Not body shaming, just worried about Elon's both whiteness and his visceral adipose tissue. So check out the YouTube channel for my reaction to the Elon photos on his yacht. But perhaps if Elon, in all of his paleness, went to the equator for 5 minutes, he could get burned. But the point is that tanning beds are much more intense than the sun. So if you go into a tanning bed, go up gradually, make the first couple of times you go to a tanning bed very minimal, very short experiences, and try not to get burned. Then when you know what your body can handle, and as you develop a quote unquote solar callus, you can do more time. I'm of Mediterranean descent. My last name is Saladino. It's obviously Italian. It's Sicilian for those of you that care. So I get tan pretty quickly, as you can tell from this video. I now live at the 7th or 8th parallel, so I'm pretty close to the equator here, and I get plenty of sunlight in my life. But I think that, yes, I would recommend that you go in a tanning bed during the vitamin D winter if you live in a place where you don't make vitamin D from ultraviolet light for that part of the year. And I think that I would welcome any evidence that anyone is aware of that a tanning bed is uniquely damaging relative to the sun when we control for intensity and we limit our time of use and do not get burned in that. I mean, ultraviolet wavelengths are ultraviolet wavelengths. You could try and mimic a sun or solar radiation in terms of UVA and UVB. If you try to look up how much sunlight is UVA versus UVB, you can try to mimic that. In terms of tanning beds, that may be something to think about, that some of the upper echelon tanning beds have very little UVB, as I recall, but just off the top of my head, I believe sunlight is 3 to 5% UVB. So when I went to tanning beds, I tried to get a little more UVB than the ultra high priced tanning beds, because I was at least thinking intuitively, perhaps I want some UVB from the sun and I'm going to get UVB in this tanning bed. Again, don't get burned, and I think you'll be fine with that. Okay, next question is from Brian, who says, Paul, I've been hearing a lot about glyphosate recently. Joe Rogan posted about this. There was a study showing that many in the United States have glyphosate in their urine. Should I worry about glyphosate? Is there enough evidence for humans to really be concerned about this? So glyphosate is Roundup. I think there is certainly a lot of concern about glyphosate, but what does the evidence really show? So when you dig into this, what you find is that we probably need more research, but intuition, first principles, and common sense would say, get as little as you possibly can. And I'll talk a little bit about ways that we get exposed to glyphosate that we may not be aware of in a moment. But the summary article that I found on this was pretty balanced. A critical review of the effects of glyphosate exposure to the environment and humans through the food supply chain. So what they say basically as a conclusion in this article is that there are some studies that suggest that glyphosate is harmful in animal models. There certainly are associations, which are observational, between exposure to glyphosate in agricultural settings and some negative outcomes in humans. We know that glyphosate inhibits the shikimate pathway, which is involved in folate synthesis. Theoretically, it's not supposed to have activity in humans, except for the notion that that shikimate pathway is used by bacteria in our guts, and it certainly could have a role disrupting the gut microbiome, something that most of us would say is pretty important, critical, indispensable for optimal human health. If you look at this study, what you will find is that glyphosate has creeped into many of our exposures, food, but also diapers, medical gauze, absorbents for female intimate hygiene, including tampons or pads. It's in our clothes. I went down a rabbit hole recently on glyphosate in my clothing, and now I'm wearing a wool shirt because I can't convince myself that glyphosate in cotton won't be absorbed into my skin. Now, I don't know for sure that this is a problem, so I'm trying to figure this out, but I have some concerns about that. I certainly intentionally, and with that in mind, I opted for organic cotton sheets on my bed, not wanting to sleep in cotton that wasn't organic, where I spend a lot of time in the bed while I'm sleeping. So I think if you limit your exposures to glyphosate, that's probably the most reasonable thing. For women, something I hadn't thought about as a man, how much glyphosate is in your tampons, how much glyphosate is in pads. Is that a problem? How much glyphosate is in babies' diapers? Kids are getting exposed to this as children. We don't really know these questions. It definitely makes me curious and a little concerned. Kind of like PFAs, perfluoroalkylated substances, it's persistent and it's ubiquitous. So I'm at least taking precautions to limit my exposures to glyphosate as much as I can. That, of course, includes buying organic fruit when and where I can. I don't eat vegetables, and trying to find honey from regions of the world that are not near agriculture or places where there is not glyphosate sprayed on crops nearby. I found another article showing that over 60% of honeys were positive for glyphosate. I think the number is probably higher than that. But in this article, they give a number of interesting pieces of information. Glyphosate is transformed into its main metabolite, AMPA, maintains all the toxic characteristics of its precursor. It's even more persistent. The half-life of AMPA is 76 to 240 days. Basically, the takeaway there is that when it's in the environment, groundwater, it's there for a while. I couldn't find any great data on washing it out of clothes. I suspect that if you have a shirt or sheets and you wash them, I don't know how much glyphosate is going to be stuck in there. I can't imagine it's a ton, but I at least was cautious and avoided it with my bedding and my clothing. Many laboratory tests demonstrated the possible absorption of glyphosate in the gastrointestinal tract of humans and mammals, as well as absorption through inhalation, ingestion, and dermal contact. Hopefully, few of you are exposed to glyphosate through dermal contact, but it's most of us getting exposed to it through our ingestions. The application of glyphosate in large quantities can also affect insects, bees, birds. That's a bad thing. Colony collapse in bees is very scary for us. I do not think this should be something that we're using in the environment. I think pesticides in general should be very tightly regulated, very controlled. I wish there were a way for us to produce all the food we needed without using pesticides in general. It gets into deeper questions of how we farm and raise animals and plants. This is the 2016 research conducted at Boston University. And Abraxas LLC revealed that the herbicide is present in 62% of conventional honeys, 45% of organic honeys. So if you look online, you can do a quick search for glyphosate-free honey on Amazon. I think there's only one that's certified glyphosate-free. The best thing that I could say is that I have tried to get honey, at least in Costa Rica, from places that are not near farms. So it's a tricky thing. And they're one of our sponsors for the podcast. The Yucatan honey from Ava Janes, I believe, was certified to be glyphosate-free. The Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico being pretty good in that regard. So at least where they're harvesting that honey from. They say here that 2 studies at the Munich Institute of the Environment found traces of glyphosate in 14 beers. Among the best known in Germany, Beck's, Paulaner, Warsteiner, and in panty liners from feminine hygiene company Organic. So it's out there, guys. It is out there. Their following products have glyphosate. So they list Kellogg's Corn Flakes and All Brand Plus sticks. I don't know what All Brand Plus sticks are, but they don't sound good. They had 0.14 milligrams per kilogram. That's a significant amount of glyphosate. The rest of these foods were wheat slices, flours, and spaghettis. Hopefully, very few of you are eating any of those things. The tolerable limit for pesticides in drinking water is 0.5 micrograms per liter. And many samples in Italy, at least, had much higher levels of glyphosate in the water. Some of you may want to get your water tested. You may want to use a filter. I use a reverse osmosis filter. I've talked about that in previous podcasts to get as much of the pesticide contamination out of my water as possible. Glyphosate has an interesting history of carcinogenic classification. Originally classified as a category C substance, showing limited evidence of carcinogenicity. Originally classified, or in 1985, classified as a category C substance. In 1991, EPA changed it to category E, substances that do not show carcinogenic potential. But in March of 2015, the IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer in Lyon, France, a department of the WHO, labeled glyphosate as possibly carcinogenic to humans to a category. Interestingly, that is a category that includes acrylamide, red meat, bitumen, wood combustion fumes, etc. I've done previous podcasts on why I don't think red meat should be included in that analysis, but take from that what you will. So from this article, I looked for the most compelling research suggesting that glyphosate had problematic effects in animal or human models, and I came up with one study that I'll show you guys. This one is certainly a little bit concerning. Multi-omics, considering multiple metabolic and proteomic disturbances, reveal non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in rats following chronic exposure to an ultra-low dose of the Roundup herbicide. So this is what's interesting for me, is that they administered this to the rats for 2 years, which is a long time in rat years, at 0.1 parts per billion, which is 50 nanograms per liter. Remember that, well, 2 things to consider here. A rat is much smaller than a human, so we have to adjust this for human size versus rat size. But also remember that we were seeing 0.14 milligrams per kilogram, which is, you can basically interconvert kilograms and liters in cornflakes and many of the pastas. So doses that are relatively equivalent when we're thinking about body size administered for much of the lives of these rats. Most of us are probably exposed to glyphosate for most of our lives. These doses led to indications of fatty liver across multiple analyses in these rats. So they say here, overall metabolome and proteome disturbances showed a substantial overlap with biomarkers of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and its progression to steatohepatosis, thus confirm liver functional dysfunction resulting from chronic ultra-low glyphosate exposure. Not a good thing. So that's a little scary. We certainly know that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is an epidemic today, probably related to insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction in general. But is it possible that low-dose glyphosate exposure in humans could contribute to steatohepatosis, accumulation of fat in the liver, and non-alcoholic fatty liver in humans? I think it is. It's at least something to be aware of and something to be concerned about. I don't think anyone should be completely convinced that glyphosate is benign for humans at this point in our lives. I think there are a lot of questions that remain with regard to glyphosate, especially in light of these studies, more of which hopefully will be done. And we must admit that pharmaceutical companies, including Bayer Monsanto, the primary producer of glyphosate, if not the only producer of glyphosate, seem to be fighting back against this pretty hard. So hopefully we will find more information about this. My cynical side also believes that even if we do understand that glyphosate is harmful for humans and that it's outlawed in more countries in the world than it currently is, what will we use in its place and how will we solve the underlying problem of pesticide use on our foods in general? As part of the answer to this question, I looked up places in the world where glyphosate is illegal, and there are many places where it has been outlawed. Unfortunately, none of these are the United States, but we have Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bahrain, Barbados, Belgium, Bermuda, Brazil, the list goes on and on. Interestingly for me, in Costa Rica, the prohibition of glyphosate began in 2019 in Costa Rica's 11 protected wildlife areas and conservation areas. So I live pretty close to one of those right now in Costa Rica. So hopefully there's not a lot of glyphosate here, but certainly on general farms in Costa Rica, people still can use glyphosate, which is a bummer. And if you were really worried about this, you could find that online and perhaps move somewhere where there was no glyphosate. It's an interesting question. People often observe they feel differently. They find the food to be better or affect them differently in places like Europe. I was just talking to a friend who's been in Paris for a while, and he was marveling about the quality of the food. I think that countries that prioritize food quality and are forward thinking when it comes to pesticide oversight are probably places that humans should be. And that sounds like a good thing to me. So one of the reasons that I enjoy living in Costa Rica is that there is less exposure to toxins in general, I believe. It's sort of a cleaner place. So it's something to think about for all of you. Many of you may not be able to move from where you are, but minimizing your exposure as best you can, I think, is a good step toward optimal health long-term. Okay, the next question is from Rebecca. She says, Paul, I've been hearing a lot about APOE4 or APOE4. I say it APOE4. Should I be worried about this? How do I know if I have this genetic polymorphism? And is it something to be aware of if you are eating an animal-based diet? So in the past, I've done APOE4 specific podcasts. This will just be a little snippet of those. And I will start high level and then get a little more specific before moving on. But my high level perspective on APOE4 is that if you are insulin sensitive, this is probably not something to worry about based on the literature. It's important to know that APOE4 is the ancestral genotype of APOE. APOE is an apolipoprotein present in our bodies, and APOE4 is what all of our primate ancestors had and what all of humans and pre-hominids had for millions of years. APOE3 appears to have arisen, I believe, 200,000 years ago. APOE2 about 80,000 years ago. Those numbers could be a little bit give or take, but remember that for the majority of pre-hominid and at least half of Homo sapiens evolution on this planet, everyone on the planet was APOE4. APOE4 to be exact, homozygous for APOE4. So why did APOE3 arise? Why did APOE2 arise? We don't really know. What we do know is that APOE4 appears to be protective against infections, parasitic infections. So is that some sort of a protective mechanism that was then less advantageous to humans as we evolved? Hard to say. Right now, APOE4 is present in, I would say, a minority of the population, with the majority of us being APOE3, I believe, and a smaller fraction being APOE2. But if you look across the population broadly, APOE4 is associated with a higher risk of dementia, specifically Alzheimer's. Now, what we also know about our population is that the majority of us are insulin resistant. When you dig into the data, as I'll show you in a moment, I think that the data is less concerning for those who are insulin sensitive, and there is a connection between insulin resistance and increased incidence of dementia in those with APOE4. If you're interested in our history as humans, consider this paper, The Evolution of Human Apolipoprotein E Isoforms, Gene Structure, Protein Function, Interaction with Dietary Factors. You can see here from the abstract, the E4 allele is associated with an increased age-related disease risk, but also the ancestral form. So we must ask ourselves, was APOE4 not advantageous to us for millions of years of human evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of evolution as Homo sapiens, during which we were very likely seeking out, treasuring, and celebrating saturated fat from animals and animal fats? It's an interesting question. I think it's quite compelling to consider that. And as you'll see in a moment, there are multiple populations on the planet of indigenous people who live closer to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle than we do as Westerners, in which APOE4 doesn't look to be harmful. So raises a lot of questions. As for Rebecca's question about how do I know, you can probably get genetic testing through your physician. I did 23andMe. This is in the news a lot today. It's quite controversial. Apparently 23andMe sold some genetic data. I don't know if you guys want to do 23andMe and have your genetic data available to be sold. It's kind of a controversial thing, but I found it interesting. Perhaps some Russian hacker has my DNA somewhere and it will come back to bite me in the future, but it was powerful for me to know that I am APOE33 and other polymorphisms that I've discussed in the past. I'm homozygous for MTHFR 677C to T. These sort of things are interesting to me, and understanding how they affect my biology is important for me as a human in general. With regard to the ancestral versions of APOE4 and the risk of dementia and other issues with cognitive decline in indigenous populations, consider this article: the inflammatory gene variants in the Chimene, an indigenous Bolivian population with a high infectious load. Chimene is spelled Tsimane. And you can see from the abstract that in individuals who were carriers or had a copy or two, in individuals who were carriers of APOE4, there was less incidence of inflammation in response to infectious load. And there are other articles showing there is actually less propensity toward dementia and cognitive decline. So in indigenous populations who are presumably fairly insulin sensitive without exposure to our processed diet, I would point to seed oils and processed sugar specifically. An APOE4 variant is protective in some populations. This variant is not a clear sentence toward Alzheimer's or dementia. In humans, there's more nuance here that we are not being told about. There's also this paper looking at APOE4 in a Nigerian population, cholesterol, APOE genotype, and Alzheimer's in the Nigerian Yoruba. As you can see here, there was a significant interaction between cholesterol, APOE4, and the risk of Alzheimer's disease in the Yoruba, a population that has lower cholesterol levels, lower incidence rates of AD compared to African populations. And they found that APOE4 was protective. They say here, increasing levels of cholesterol and LDL were associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease in individuals without the APOE4 allele, but not in those with APOE4. There was no significant association between levels of triglycerides and Alzheimer's disease risk in those without APOE4. There's also quite an interesting case study looking at an individual with APOE4. This individual is heterozygous, one copy of APOE4. Here is this case study titled APOE4, the door to insulin-resistant dyslipidemia and brain fog. A case study. This was an individual, a male who had dementia. And the way that dementia is often assayed is with various cognitive rating systems like the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, et cetera. This individual was given a diet high in saturated fats and low in carbohydrates. Again, he was heterozygous for APOE4. He was type 2 diabetic. And they say that at the end of the intervention, this is just one case study, the patient's MoCA, Montreal Cognitive Assessment, improved from 23 out of 30 to 29 out of 30. Normal is greater than 26. His type 2 diabetes reversed. His pre-intervention hemoglobin A1C was 7.8. Post-intervention A1C 5.5. Patient achieved statistically significant improvements in markers of metabolic syndrome. The results of the case study suggest that a clinically prescribed ketogenic diet, strong potential to restore systemic insulin sensitivity, metabolic sensitivity, metabolic flexibility in a diabetic, even an APOE4 heterozygous carrier. Most people within the nutritional community would point to this and say that person should not get a ketogenic diet, not a high-fat diet, high in saturated fat because they have APOE4, but everything got better in this individual. His metabolic sensitivity got better, his dementia improved based on his MoCA rating, and he lost weight. So at least in this case study, we can substantiate or begin to look with more favorability toward the notion that APOE4 does not mean dementia necessarily. And I would argue that it is all context, with the most important context being, you guys will know the answer to this if you've followed any of my work in the past, your insulin sensitivity. Consider this article, demonstrated brain insulin resistance with Alzheimer's disease patients is associated with IGF-1 resistance, IRS-1 dysregulation, and cognitive decline. There is a mountain of research like this looking at what we would call type 3 diabetes, aka Alzheimer's. We know there is brain insulin resistance associated with dementia. And if you look at the research in people who are insulin resistant, it looks like APOE4 heterozygosity or homozygosity, having an APOE4 allele, could lead to a higher preponderance of problems with dementia. But kind of like the LDL issue, is it the APOE4 or is it the insulin resistance? If you consider the Bolivian Yoruba or the Chimene, we can begin to make arguments that perhaps it is not APOE4 as much as it is the insulin resistance. And in those with insulin resistance, does the APOE4 genotype start to look a lot worse? Possibly. Remember that the majority of our population in the West is insulin resistant. And I think many researchers, nutritional and physicians, make this mistake. We try to extend our conclusions regarding an insulin resistant population to everyone, to all humans, many of whom who listen to this podcast may be working toward or have achieved insulin sensitivity. And I don't believe in that situation we should fear saturated fats from animals, animal foods, red meat, even if you have an APOE4 allele. I think those foods contain nutrients that are good for your brain and very possibly protective against dementia long-term. So something to consider. I would strongly rebel, question, ask for curiosity, and look skeptically upon the across-the-board notion that those with APOE4 variants should not be eating saturated fat. And if you have concerns about that, follow your insulin sensitivity, get a fasting insulin. All the labs I talked about at the beginning of this podcast will give you a sense of your metabolic health, and you can track that moving forward. Okay, next question is from Bryce. He says, Paul, I've been on depression meds, SSRIs, for a number of years. I don't really know if they've helped my depression. I've heard a lot in the news recently about medications like this possibly not being that effective or having negative side effects. Can you comment on the serotonin theory of depression and the possibility these medications may not be all they're cracked up to be? So yeah, this is a really important question for us within Western medicine. I don't practice psychiatry anymore. I did my residency in psychiatry at the University of Washington and then got board certified in nutrition, postgraduate studies. So I have some experience with this, and my perspective, based on my experience in the past, is that these medications, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SNRIs, serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, or dopamine norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, like bupropion, do not address the root cause of depression. I've done a whole separate podcast on mental health, mental illness, that you can find on my podcast, Fundamental Health. I think that what is going on in most of these situations is essentially an autoimmune condition in the brain, neuroinflammation. How do we fix that? We fix our guts. How do we fix our guts? We remove the things that are damaging the guts. How do we fix our brains? We remove the things that are causing inflammation throughout the body by gut damage, etc. This is what I'm driving toward with all of my work right now. And for quite a while now, I believe that the most evolutionarily appropriate, least inflammatory, most nutrient-rich, most health-promoting diet for humans is animal-based. As I said in the beginning of the podcast, if you want to get started with that, join us for Animal-Based 30, animalbased30.com. It's free with heart and soil supplements starting August the 1st. I think this podcast is going to be out partway through August, but it is not too late to join us for Animal-Based 30. So I am skeptical of the depression meds. They help some people, and I've seen a lot of bad side effects with them. There recently was a interesting review which was published. This is in Molecular Psychiatry, a Nature journal, and it is from July 20th, 2022. And this is a serotonin theory of depression systemic umbrella review of the evidence. You can see here the conclusion they draw is that the main areas of serotonin research provide no consistent evidence of there being an association between serotonin and depression, and no support for the hypothesis that depression is caused by lowered serotonin activity or concentrations. Some evidence was consistent with the possibility that long-term antidepressant use reduces serotonin concentration. That's bad. Taking a drug that affects your neurotransmitters long-term that leads to lower levels of a certain neurotransmitter, that's quite concerning for humans. So many people have written about this and spoken about this in the past. I am not the first. I think the important thing to consider is that these medications do not treat the root cause. They help some people, at least in the short term, but I have major concerns about their use long term, and I don't think they're getting to the long-term fix here for humans. I think that in psychiatry, physicians should be thinking about the root cause, checking neuroinflammation as best we can, looking at insulin resistance. And as a whole in medicine, whether it's psychiatry, rheumatology, endocrinology, cardiology, whatever, we should be thinking about food as the first therapy, as the first intervention for humans in general. It's such a powerful intervention, but that would require us to actually have meaningful dialogue as physicians about which foods are healthy and not for humans so that we can all come to some understanding, because within medicine, there is much debate. I think that's part of the problem within medicine today is that no one can agree. Should we recommend a vegan diet? Should we recommend a paleo diet, a Mediterranean diet? Look, anything is better than what we're doing now. And I would be happy if people were recommending a Mediterranean diet, but I would like to see much more research for a animal-based diet. That's one of the reasons we built the Animal-Based Nutrition Research Foundation. You can find it at abnrf.org. We are working on creating studies with Stefan Van Vliet at Utah State University, and that is coming very soon. There's a link to donate there for ABNRF. There's a link to the study that will be up there soon. But we've got stuff going there, but we need more research on animal-based diets. I knew we had to do it, so I just wanted to create it myself. And it's in the works, guys. So stay tuned for that. Incidentally, the animal-based gathering for Costa Rica for 2023 is going to be in April. You can find that at animalbasedgathering.com, and proceeds from that support the ABNRF. We don't make any profit on that or anything. It's just a gathering here. So if you want to join a bunch of people from the animal-based diet movement, check it out, animalbasedgathering.com. It's here in Costa Rica in 2023, and proceeds from that go to support the ABNRF, Animal-Based Nutrition Research Foundation. But in terms of depression medications, I will say there's a lot of people questioning this, and I think that's a good thing because I have pretty significant concerns about long-term use of SSRI medications in terms of neurotransmitters in the brain. Corollary to that is a set of interesting questions about nootropics. And though this wasn't asked in the AMA, I will just add this at this point. There are many supplements out there that claim to be nootropic that use things like huperzine A, which are essentially acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. I'm not a fan of these. It's easy to affect the neurotransmitter levels in the brain acutely. We know this has profound effects on human awareness, human recall in the short term, but I have concerns that long term, this is probably not a good thing for humans. Nicotine does this, obviously, very difficult to get off of. Acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, huperzine A being one. There are many of these do this. Yes, you can increase your attention with things like Adderall or ADHD meds, but how does this affect the brain moving forward? Is the brain able to adapt? It's just a scary thing to be doing as humans for our brains. Like, I don't think we should be messing with the neurotransmitters in a strong way for long amounts of time. I try to do it as little as possible with as little as possible exogenous intervention. I don't do nicotine. I don't do nootropics. I don't do any of that stuff. Certainly the foods I eat will affect these things, but anything beyond that is what I'm referring to. I steer clear of those because I have concerns about their long-term effects on human neurotransmitter levels. These SSRI studies begin to suggest that this is a powerful drug, but it could affect neurotransmitter levels long-term. Correct the root cause. All right, this next question is from Colleen. She says, thank you so much for opening the podcast to questions. I'd like to ask about gallbladder and liver health. In a Facebook Live this summer, you answered my question about gallstones. You told me they are caused by a choline deficiency. This is a very interesting piece of information that if you look at the literature, choline is required to move bile salts from the liver canaliculi into the collecting tubules for the gallbladder. So in order to make bile in your gallbladder, in order to concentrate bile in the gallbladder, that bile has bile acids, cholesterol, a few other ingredients in it. That bile is composed of multiple things, including bile acids and cholesterol, but specifically that ratio between bile acids and cholesterol, if it gets out of balance, that appears to be a initiating factor for the formation of the most common type of gallstones, cholesterol gallstones. Why are people low in bile acids in their bile? I think a lot of it is because of choline deficiency. So how many thousands of gallbladders are removed from patients every year due to choline deficiency that could be remedied? So the question goes on, how should I increase my choline levels? Liver, either fresh or desiccated, and egg yolks are the best way absolutely to do that. Can I measure my choline levels? Not easily. I wouldn't worry about that necessarily. She says, I take phosphatidylcholine and liposomal glutathione. Phosphatidylcholine is great if you want to take it as a supplement. I think get it from food first. Liposomal glutathione is something I would be careful with. I am not a fan of consistent chronic glutathione use. If you are getting your fillings out and they're full of mercury, if you have a very toxic exposure, short-term phasic use of glutathione may be helpful, but I would not do it long-term. I don't think you need glutathione for your bile, for your bile on a daily basis long-term. The body adjusts, and the breakdown products of glutathione, including cysteine, can put stress on various parts of human biochemistry. The body is very careful about how much glutathione it makes, and I would not supplement with glutathione. That's at least my feeling about glutathione right now in a tonic fashion. I think that an animal-based diet is great. Be insulin sensitive, get choline in your diet, liver and egg yolks, and I think that your gallbladder will improve. Now, I should point out that choline is also a very maligned nutrient, a critical nutrient for the brain that is very much under fire in the TMAO world. People say, oh, choline in meat causes TMAO, which we know is associated with problems. I've talked about TMAO at length on other podcasts. I won't do it in this one other than to say that there is no solid evidence that TMAO is harmful to humans. And the whole discussion of TMAO in connection with choline and carnitine makes absolutely no sense to me when you can get more preformed TMAO by eating fish than you could by eating an equivalent amount of red meat. And we know that choline is essential for human health, along with carnitine, another precursor to TMAO in the human gut. That is pure bullshit. Don't worry about that stuff. Anyone who worries about TMAO, I become very skeptical of their position on other issues because they're clearly not informed about this. It's quite evident that TMAO is nothing to worry about for humans. Chris says, these questions piqued my interest the most. They're the things I'm dealing with in trying to establish an animal-based diet. Chris should join us for Animal-Based 30 at Heart and Soil, animalbased30.com. How strict do I need to be to see results? Your mileage may vary, Chris. I don't know. I would say start 80-20 and go from there. I'm 100-0. Cheat days are bullshit. You guys know this, but I probably am from a different planet. It's just how my brain works. I don't see a reason to do cheat days when I can eat the best foods all the time. I want to feel good as much of the time as possible. How much fruit or honey is too much? It's too much when that amount of fruit and honey makes you so full that you can't get in meat and organs, which I believe are the center of an animal-based diet. On the Carnivore MD website, there's going to be a calculator very soon, possibly by the time this podcast comes out, maybe in the next week, in which we'll give you macros based on your body composition and your activity level that'll help you decide. And from that, you'll know or get a sense of how much meat and organs you want to get. As a basic rule, 1/2 ounce of liver, a few ounces of liver per week, a few ounces of heart per week, fresh or desiccated, like we make at Heart and Soil. You guys know if you can't get the fresh organs, check us out at heartandsoil.co to get these in your diet. If you're a male, you want to increase your testosterone, think about getting a little desiccated testicle or fresh testicle. Other organs, kidney, spleen, pancreas, if you can get them. I think one of the things that I'm proud of at Heart and Soil is that we put these in a desiccated form and make it really easy for people to get these organs in their diet. So a few ounces of organs per week. Based on how much you weigh, I think anywhere around 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day is a good start if it's a goal body weight. So I'm 165. For me, that goal would be 165 grams of protein per day. Most days I get significantly more than that, but that's a good place to start in terms of your protein requirements. If you're eating so much fruit and honey that you can't get those in, you can't get the organs and the meat, then you're eating too much fruit and honey. And I think beyond that, go by what your body says. I'm working out a lot. I'm surfing every day here in Costa Rica. I eat a lot of fruit and honey. Today, I'm going to eat a pineapple, probably a papaya and a half. I'm going to probably eat 2, maybe 3 mangoes today and 4 to 5 tablespoons of honey at least. I'm eating 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. Unquestionably now, if you guys have seen my blood work, you know that my fasting insulin remains 2.4 micro-IU per ml. Doesn't affect my insulin sensitivity at all. but it does improve my electrolyte status and the fullness of my muscles, my overall health. My testosterone is better. My SHBG, my sex hormone binding globulin, is low. So see what you think. In the calculator preview that I'll give you right now, I would say that if you're very active, you may want to think about more carbohydrates in your diet. If you're minimally active, less carbohydrates are fine. I think every human should probably be getting 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrates a day in their diet. That's going to help you. If you're very active, like me, on the website, I think we said if you're exercising more than 6 hours per week, you probably want even more than that, depending on your body weight. What about boredom? Boredom is your path to liberation, my friend. Boredom is good. I went to a meditation retreat one time. It was a Shambhala meditation retreat in Red Feather Lakes, Colorado. And they had this saying that's always stuck with me. And it was entertainment, boredom, peace. I think we must move through boredom to find peace. So if you're at boredom, it means you've removed entertainment. And if you've removed entertainment, you're closer to peace. Peace in your life, peace in terms of dietary choices. So if you're bored, push through being bored. Don't fight it, push through it, and you'll get to peace with regard to diet. You're going to need to detox mentally and emotionally from foods. Boredom is a good thing. Don't look to entertain yourself with food. Cheat days are often sabotage for most humans. How to eat animal-based when traveling and eating out. So when I travel, when this podcast comes out, I will actually be in the midst of traveling. You can watch my stories on Instagram. I always show how I do it. It requires preparation. I cook food ahead of time. I use glass and I shop ahead of time. And I get an Airbnb where I can cook. I prefer an Airbnb that has a grill. That way I don't even have to worry about the cookware at an Airbnb because there's no way that I am going to use a nonstick pan. If there's a nonstick pan at an Airbnb, I'm not using it. Sometimes I go in the cabinets and I pull out a sauce pot because it's stainless steel and I cook in that. But if an Airbnb has a grill, it makes it easier for me. In the past, I've traveled many times all over the US and Central America with a stainless steel pan in my backpack. The guys at the TSA security are like, what are you doing? Because I want to know that I can cook in something that's not PFA, perfluoroalkylated substance laden. I'm intentional about this, guys. I don't mess around. When you're eating out, ask them what they cook the food in. One of the goals for this upcoming trip to the States is to go to restaurants and to ask them what they cook the food in, and we'll make a reel out of it. I think, unfortunately, many of them will have seed oils, but I think most steakhouses will cook your steak on the grill, no problem, and that'll be an upgrade for you. I'm curious of your thoughts on water, filtered versus tap versus mineral, the amount needed hydration through food in addition to water. What I'll say is that here in Costa Rica, I don't drink much water because I'm getting a lot of hydration through fruit. And I live in an environment that's humid. So I'm not losing as much to equilibrate with the environment. When I'm going to Arizona this week, certainly I'm going to lose more and I'm going to have to hydrate more. So it's going to depend on where you are and how much fruit, how much liquid you're getting from the fruit you're eating. I would say that in a day, I probably drink less than 10 ounces of water a day now because I'm eating a pineapple, a papaya and a half, 2 to 3 mangoes, etc. And I'm peeing plenty. I'm not dehydrated. I'm just getting a lot from my fruit, from the food I eat. Now, the water I do drink is reverse osmosis filtered. If you're drinking the majority of your water filtered, like RO, you may want to remineralize it. There's a lot of good remineralization supplements on Amazon. In general, I would know what the quality of the spring water you're drinking is as well. I've done previous podcasts on various spring waters and contamination in them, PFAs and things like Topo Chico, arsenic and things like Starkey water. They're hard to find. I like Mountain Valley in general. From what I've seen, the certificate of analysis of Mountain Valley looks pretty clean. I'm not a sponsor, no affiliation with them, but I do appreciate them. And while we're talking about water, let's talk about salt. Have a podcast sponsor, Kalima Salt, which is great, microplastics free. And I think Redmond is going to come on and sponsor the podcast. I would talk about those two, even if they weren't podcast sponsors. They're the two salts that I know of to be the lowest in microplastics from what I've seen. This person says, I grew up in Fairfax County in the 80s and 90s. Small world. That's funny. I wonder if I crossed paths with Chris during those years. Okay, wrapping up with a few questions here. Pat says, I'd be interested to hear more about how to get started eating liver for those who have trouble with the taste and more information on adding honey to your diet. I've done it here and there, but I'm never sure how much would be appropriate for someone who focuses on gaining strength and lean muscle mass. So liver first and then honey. You can do liver raw. I think you'd want to freeze it beforehand. People always ask, what about parasites? I think if the liver's been frozen, it's pretty safe. Nothing is completely safe. I don't think I've ever had a parasite. I've done lots of GI maps and stuff, and I've never seen an issue. If your liver is from a sketchy source, yeah, probably. If you listen to last week's AMA podcast, you know that PFAS, perfluoroalkylated substances, do occur in wild animal liver, and you want to get good quality liver. Regenerative, grass-fed, grass-finished farm would be the place to get your liver from. Half an ounce a day, or Heart and Soil supplements. You can do it raw. You can do it cooked. You can do it frozen. That's how I would start. But I wouldn't just end at liver. I would start with liver and heart and kind of go from there. Then after that, you might try testicle if you're a guy, or even women sometimes benefit from testicle in their diet, and other organs, spleen, kidney, pancreas, brain is great for mental performance, all that stuff. Now, honey, think about where your honey's coming from. First of all, if you can get glyphosate-free honey, that's great. Organic honey is good, but as you saw early in this podcast, a significant amount of organic honeys are also contaminated with glyphosate. So that's tragic. So you want to know where your honey is produced. Are there farms that have glyphosate within a 3 to 6 mile radius or diameter, respectively? And how much should you add? Well, it depends how many carbohydrates you have in your diet and how active you are in general. For me, I don't fear honey at all. I'm very active, and my body kind of gives me a sense. Like I said, I probably have 5 to 6 tablespoons of honey per day. Tablespoon, 10 to 15 grams, that's a lot of honey. I literally drink honey when I wake up in the morning after I get a little small movement before I surf. I add it to my raw milk, kefir, cream, egg yolk, smoothie in the morning. I don't fear the honey. I think it's quite valuable. I've talked about benefits of honey on previous podcasts. All right, last one for this podcast. Clive says, what about uric acid? I read somewhere that eating a lot of meat causes uric acid to accumulate, difficult for the body to get rid of, often leading to gout. So I'm glad that Clive asked this question because it's something I get a lot. And there's something really important to understand about this, which is that if you are insulin sensitive, eating meat, eating organs, eating fruit is not going to cause uric acid to accumulate in your body. I've checked my uric acid many times. It's often below 4, which is the lower end of normal. Eating pounds of meat, organs, fruit, honey in my diet, fructose and meat, all the things that raise my uric acid. No, the human body has a delicately tuned system that gets rid of uric acid in the kidney when you make more of it from those things. If you are insulin resistant, that mechanism doesn't work as well. So gout is a disease of insulin resistance until proven otherwise. There may be a small number of people on the planet who have some genetic polymorphisms which predispose them to gout, but that is a small minority. The majority of humans will be fine provided they are insulin sensitive. So consider this paper, the serum uric acid concentrations in meat eaters, fish eaters, vegetarians, and vegans. This is a cross-sectional analysis from the EPIC Oxford cohort study. So this is a cohort study. It's epidemiology. It's not an interventional study, but they found that individuals consuming a vegan diet, wait for it, had the highest serum concentrations of uric acid compared to meat eaters, fish eaters, and vegetarians, especially in men. Tell me again that meat is the cause of elevated uric acid in humans. Now, again, context is everything. How insulin sensitive are you? And I have worked with people in the past who have been insulin resistant and they eat meat and they have problems, or they eat processed sugar and they have problems. You need to be insulin sensitive as you're working through this process. So I know the question you guys are going to ask. Paul, I'm insulin resistant. I'm obese. How much meat can I eat? I would say check your uric acid at baseline, gradually increase your meat and organs, check your uric acid. If it doesn't elevate, you're fine. There may be some people that are predisposed who may need to work on their insulin resistance, their insulin sensitivity before they go super heavy on the meat. And that's fine. You can do it gradually, but I think it will improve over time. Consider this article as well, gout and diabetes, a common combination. There is so much literature looking at the very strong association between gout, which is the accumulation of excess uric acid in joints, and insulin resistance. Gout diet, insulin resistance syndrome. I would say gout is insulin resistance until proven otherwise. Show me your fasting insulin if you have gout, and then we'll talk. So takeaway from that is if you're insulin sensitive, don't worry about uric acid. Know what your fasting insulin is to know if you're insulin sensitive. If you're insulin resistant, just watch your uric acid as you're increasing the amount of meat in your diet. Get rid of processed sugar and seed oils. I think you'll be fine. If your uric acid is going skyward as you're increasing meat and organs, work on your insulin sensitivity first and gradually increase that meat. But I think that insulin sensitivity will improve within time. If I had to just do a back of the envelope estimation, I would say give it 2 to 3 months and then 6 in a year. Within a year, you should be much more insulin sensitive. If you make changes to your diet, including getting rid of processed sugar, getting rid of seed oils, you can adjust your macros to what works for you, but do make a dietary change. And if you need help with a dietary change, one last time, join us for Animal Base 30, animalbase30.com with Heart and Soil supplements this month in August. It's free. There's tons of resources there for you guys. So hopefully this AMA follow-up will be helpful for you guys. These are burning questions that you guys often ask. I like to get to them. It's fun. And I hope you guys are enjoying the new format. So I will talk to you guys soon. Exciting podcast coming next week.